Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone. This interview will be done by Shannon Daly Harris. I am Erica Littlewolf. I am the Director of Storytelling and Narrative Change at Auburn Theological Seminary. We are very, very excited to be here with Lynn and have you all join us. Our first conversation was with Tommy Orange, and this is our second conversation in this series. And we just like to thank all our donors for pitching in so this event can happen. I will be turning it over to our Dean, Patrick Reyes, to get us started with a grounding practice.
It is so good to see everyone. Good to see Peter and Sam and all good. Teresa, good to see you all. If you could drop in the chat just where you're coming in from, that'd be great. Just so we know the chat's working, and also because I want to know where you're coming from. I'm so grateful that Lynn, who I've known for a long time, is having this conversation with our director of storytelling, Erica. And part of the invitation was to do a grounding practice that gets us into the space in these times that feel, at least for me, a little overwhelming. And given the theme of Lynn's book, the idea of not just embracing our time, if you just took the full titles including interfaith friendships, how do we think about friendships? Our practice is going to focus on thinking, reflecting, being with our friends who, if you're a fan of scripture, Proverbs 17 says, a friend loves at all times, a brother's born in adversity. So if we're thinking about how friends stick with us long time, forever, and we stick by them, I want to invite us to remember those friends. I'm going to start with a quick story, and then we're going to do a quick practice. The quick story is in when I was younger, growing up in California, the hills outside of Salinas, California, were ran with bikes. I don't know if y'all remember E.T., the end when they got the little basket and they're riding around in their bikes. That was me and my buddies, me and my homies riding everywhere together. Gabe and um, Steven, who I'll share a little bit about in a second, rode our bikes everywhere. You could not separate us. We went to CCD, went to Catholic school together. We prayed together. Our first communions were together. We got confirmed together in the church. We loved each other very deeply. Just some of the greatest times with those friends. In As we got older into adulthood, we walked with each other when all of our parents got cancer. We walked with each other through hard times, through celebrations, through graduations. It was one of those friendships that were born from when we were really young till when we were really old. And I thought we were too old for things that plagued our community. And in 2021, in the midst of all the pandemic, uh, my best friend, Stephen, was murdered, which is not something that we had imagined would happen to us. We had grown up, we had gotten out of the community, and we thought the life that we had lived, and so those prayers, those moments, those rolling through hills took on a different meaning, that friends love at all times really meant something to us. And I'm going to ask us to call on our own friends, the people that you've walked with through life and through death. We are in a deep moment right now. And I think honoring the full scope of what friendship means is important. So if you can go ahead and get comfortable, close your eyes if you're able, and in a safe place. If you're driving, please don't close your eyes. I don't know who's every now and then there's someone on a Zoom call who's driving somewhere. Remember to take that deep breath in, deep breath out. Take one more deep breath in and deep breath out. I want you to call to your memory a time when you met a friend. But I don't mean right now or in recent memory. As best you can, I want you to go back to childhood. It could be your first best friend, it could be an adult who befriended you. I want you to think about yourself in elementary school finding a friend. Bring their face into focus again in childhood. See their hair, see their face. They're smiling at you. Your friends, obviously. Notice the way they are sitting or standing across from you, but really bring into focus this friend from a long time ago. And as you sit with this friend, I want you to imagine the scene that you had with this friend. Imagine the context that you were friends together. It could be a school, a church, your home, but really bring into focus the fact that you were friends at some time and some place. Are you playing games? Are you eating food? Are you celebrating something? Are you goofing off? Bring into your memory as best you can a friend from childhood. As you see yourself with this friend, as you are spending time with this someone who you have found a connection with, I want you in your imagination to see them leaning in and telling you a secret. This secret that they're about to tell you is why you are friends. Imagine your childlike self receiving this message from this close friend. Why are they your friend? It could be a word of affirmation. It could be an I love you. It could just be we're having a good time. But imagine this person, this young person, smiling at you and telling you why you're friends. Let the wisdom of that young person wash over you. Let it be a gift, a reminder that friendship matters to you at all points in your life. Let those words sink into you as an affirmation of your gifts as a friend. And as you let these words wash over you, knowing that you have befriended someone who sees you, who values you, who loves you, know that in this material life, on this plane, at some point, that friendship will end. At some point, you will have a final goodbye that you may or may not be aware of. Sometimes transition of life, sometimes it's transition of just coming of age, moving away, taking a new job, moving to a new city. But at some point, that childhood friend and you will no longer be in the same place. And I want you to imagine in that moment how you might honor the gift of that friendship. The words that the young person just said to you, how might you honor them back? In your imagination, I want you to see, hear, feel, experience you expressing gratitude, responding to that childhood affirmation of you as a friend. And I want you to respond, to give a gift back, to say thank you to this childhood friend. I want you to notice the ways that both being affirmed as a friend and expressing gratitude for friendship feels in your body, feels in your spirit, feels in your soul. Take one last moment with this reflection on friendship, with this person who was a friend, who may still be a friend, who will be a friend. Remember your friendship matters. And when you're ready, come back to the screen. Got one last practice for you before we get into this conversation about the power of friendship. I want you to go ahead and put in the chat the name of that friend that you're honoring that came to mind. We have Matt Johnson, Jack, Katie, Anna Casey, Caleb, Kate. We thank you for being friends. We thank you for bringing your friends into this space. And the last thing I'll say to close out this little grounding practice is to say thank you to my friends, Erica Littlewolf and Lynn Cooper and Shannon Daly Harris, for being friends now and I imagine for a long time. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I almost got so lost in your meditation, I forgot I had to come back and talk. So here I am. This is the point in which I would normally introduce Lynn, but I have failed to pull up your biography. So I'm wondering if you could introduce yourself to us. And after that, then Shannon will go ahead and interview you. Thank you so much, Lynn.
Oh, well, thank you, Erica. And thank you, Patrick Reyes. Oh, you've put me in such a sweet place. And I was thinking about a picture that I have of eighth grade, which is a known awkward time in many of our lives. And my good friend and I was a soccer player. She was a ballerina. I'm wearing a soccer shirt, soccer shoes. She's wearing short shorts and a tank top, and we just do not look like a pair. And that picture just hit me in such a sweet place. So I just want to say thank you. Well, it is such an honor to be part of this Dean series and to be friends with everyone at Auburn Theological Seminary. It is such a gift. And many of you may know that President Jordan Simpson and Dean Reyes were at Tufts University just a couple weeks ago. But to my bio, my name is Lynn Cooper. I am the Associate Director of the University Chaplaincy and the Catholic Chaplain at Tufts University. I've been serving as a chaplain at Tufts since 2008. And I hold a Doctor of Ministry from Boston University School of Theology. And I went to divinity school at Harvard Divinity School, and I went to Tufts as an undergraduate. But I was not an observant religious person when I was an undergraduate. So I feel like I get to live in these many worlds. But it's a gift to be here. And I want to say, too, that I was part of the women's soccer team at Tufts, and I see some of my teammates here. And that is a big part of my understanding of what it means to be a chaplain on a multi-faith team. Those learnings are so translatable, and I think the only way I was able to really write this book and to sink into writing in this new stage of life is because of the discipline from sport and showing up, giving it your all when you don't feel like it whatsoever. And I continue to realize that these parts of my life that I thought were very separate are actually deeply connected.
Wonderful. Well, I'm Shannon Daly Harris, Associate Dean of Auburn Theological Seminary, and it's my great privilege and joy to get to have a conversation with Dr. Lynn Cooper this evening. And so welcome again, Lynn, for being here. I was grateful for the opportunity to read Dr. Cooper's book, Embracing Our Time, The Sacrament of Interfaith Friendship twice pre-publication. Each of you who registered for the lecture this evening through Eventbrite are also lucky because you're going to receive a copy of her book as part of your registration. And you'll want to give copies to other folks, and just know that it's available for pre-order through online retailers. And I understand, Lynn, that copies have already made their way into just a few bookstores. Did I hear? What?
Correct. Yeah. 2 days ago, very unexpectedly, I got a nice phone call. So
That is so thrilling. So most of us will have to wait until May unless you can find it in your local bookstore, but you can pre-order it now. And but again, if you've registered for this lecture through our Eventbrite process, you'll have a copy that will be arriving on your doorstep. So just let me give you a little peek to the chapter titles alone to whet your appetite and give you a sense of the rich content that lies in store for you when you read it. The first chapter is titled Friendship in the Tradition, and then Interdependence and Difference. Then the chapter Listening to God, Ourselves, and One Another. The chapter after that is Sacramental Consciousness and Participation. Then a chapter Humility, Courage, and Allyship. And then finally, the final chapter, Wellspring of Hope, the Sacrament of Interfaith Friendships. I just hope those little teasers of chapter titles will give you a sense of what lies ahead for you in this book. So through our leadership development programs, Auburn Theological Seminary is committed to ground faith and religious leaders in their traditions and in a diverse multi-faith community of learners. We're committed to equipping leaders with vocational practices and tools to sustain their work long-term and intergenerationally. And then thirdly, we're committed to connecting leaders who are committed to healing with peers across religious and cultural difference. So Dr. Cooper's book, Embracing Our Time, offers really important insights to speak to each of these areas of Auburn's leadership development work. And so that will sort of provide the arc for our conversation this evening. So again, Lynn, I'd love to start just by hearing about your own grounding in faith. What's the faith you were raised in? What has it meant to you to dig your roots down deeper, maybe tapping into teachings and aspects that you only learned about later? And then hope maybe you might turn to what it means to you to do interfaith work from that deeply rooted place in your own tradition. But anyhow, just start by sharing with us your own grounding in faith tradition, if you would.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Shannon, for these questions. And just for the invitation to reflect. So I grew up in an Irish Catholic family in Connecticut. I think a few folks are here, so I'll give a little wave. And, you know, I write about this in the beginning of my book, but we really lived ritual within ritual. You know, there was the ritual of going to Mass on Sundays and all the choreography that went into that. You know, my mom getting 5 kids ready to go. And I know my brother Patrick and we both really did a good job of making everyone late all the time. But I think that there's something about that rhythm of weekly engagement in the liturgy. You know, it was just the water in which I lived and swam. And, you know, even if we were traveling or, you know, for sports or wherever, you know, as soon as we got to the hotel, my mom would get out the yellow pages and find the church and call for Mass. Like, it was just part of life. And as I think back about those experiences, you know, and a lens that I often use with my students in interfaith work is, how does our tradition change and affect how we think about time and experience time? And I think the rhythms of weekly Mass and the rhythms of the liturgical calendar really shaped my understanding and my experience of time, and not in a conscious way, maybe, but in those subconscious ways. I think about, when you're a kid, like, you don't go out at night so much, you know, and going to midnight Mass, like, that was strange. Mm-hmm. It was wondrous and strange and, being tired and sleepy. It was very kind of dreamy, and those kinds of spiritual disruptions I just find really fascinating and alluring. I think about, during that season between Christmas Eve and Epiphany, or Christmas Eve and New Year's Day, it was just feast after feast. Like, every day is a feast, you know? And I can remember as a kid being like, we just went to church yesterday. Like, why are we going again? Like, it was just so kind of baffling on the one hand. And on the other, my mom would be like, yeah, well, you go on today too, And there was this sense of a larger framework, that even if I didn't know all the reasons, it was just embedded within us, this scaffolding within. And when we think of, the Gregorian calendar, the academic calendar, now that I'm a working person, like the fiscal calendar, like all of these calendars, okay. But then there's these religious calendars, and they really change how we engage with, of course, religiosity and community. I'm thinking of our friends who just celebrated Eid, right? The holy month of Ramadan in the middle of, for our students, like the middle of midterms, and soon enough, it'll be at the beginning of the year and then in the summer. And, this is a really profitable lens to think about interfaith work and how the many different ways that our traditions keep track of time, and tell the story through the story of time.
Mm.
But when I think too about, my tradition, I didn't learn about other aspects of my tradition until later. And I think that that's the norm for many American Catholics. The only students who I meet who know what Catholic social teaching is are people who went to Catholic schools, and not even all of them. No.
And so for those who maybe on our thing who might also not know what Catholic social teaching is, can you unpack that a little bit? And why do you think it is that it wasn't, and when you said you didn't learn about it until later, was that like in college that you learned about it? And why do you think that is a late learning for you and for other folks?
Absolutely.
Frame what it is for folks first.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So let me just say, I didn't know what it was until I had to teach it at high school. So after divinity school, Catholic social teaching are the social teachings of the church. There are about honoring human dignity. There are 7 principles. They begin with honoring human dignity, solidarity, participation, preferential option of the poor. These are teachings that implore us to see Christ in the face of other people, right? Not just Eucharistic adoration in a sanctuary, but out in the world. And these are, I think, I remember thinking like, wow, this is like the best kept secret of the Catholic Church. And then I realized like people actually say that. Oh yeah, it is the best kept secret. And I think, there's probably many reasons for this. One is that we don't do a good job of adult catechesis, adult spiritual formation. And I think so much emphasis, I think a lot about how we prepare people for sacraments. That's one of the great joys of my work. And 'tis the season right now. We're getting very close to Easter Vigil. But I think there's also so much emphasis on the sacraments that sometimes we miss this, which are really important, but sometimes we miss these other dimensions of formation. How do we make decisions? How do we spend our money? How do we use our time? All of those things actually point us towards what our values are. And, I think in the same way that like mysticism can be threatening, I think parts of Catholic social teaching can be threatening to certain structures. And so there might also be kind of an overlaying of withholding, whether consciously or unconsciously. But yeah, so like I said, like I didn't know what Catholic social teaching was until I started working out of divinity school and had to teach it in a social justice class. And it was mind blowing, and it offered a framework for things that I kind of, I felt inherently, but then, wow, there's words to this and they're really beautiful. And then, this was before I met a lot of the nuns and, people who are kind of living the faith in these really prophetic ways. And of course, for them, it's, a huge part of how they define their vocation and their charisms. But I'm thinking too, what does Catholic social teaching mean in real life? I mean, we were talking about this earlier today. I work at Tufts University, where we've been in the news quite a bit lately with our student Rumesa, who was taken by Homeland Security. And, our traditions, especially in times of grief and disorientation, they provide scaffolding. They guide us, whether it's someone dies and what do? We do the things that we've been doing for centuries. We have an entry point into making meaning and processing these experiences. And I felt that way in that moment of learning what was going on with this student who has participated in several of the interfaith programs I run, the interfaith friendship program I run, in addition to, being a incredible leader and older sister to especially undergraduates. And what does Catholic social teaching call us to do? Solidarity, human dignity, participation. Like these are guideposts. It's a compass. It's a way of orienting oneself in the world. And so that's an element of the tradition that I really didn't get to discover until later. And I was laughing with Erica earlier today because I'll get to that in just a minute. But I just want to talk a little bit about grief. I think that in the same way, as I mentioned, when someone passes, we have these rituals. There is something so powerful about sinking into this spirit and practice of lamentation, of weeping, ritual weeping. Weeping is a spiritual practice. And Valerie Kaur, which some of you may or may not know, but she's a Sikh activist, and I think one of the prophets of our time. But she has this beautiful line where she says, you don't have to know people in order to grieve with them.
Mm-hmm.
You grieve with them in order to know them.
Wow.
You don't need to know people in order to grieve with them. You grieve with them in order to know them. And I'll say, in these last few weeks, I've been at Tufts for a long time. I was a student there. I didn't know the child development department, but I've come to know these people, and they've come to be good friends in this crisis. And grieving together has brought us to this place. And I, think too, it's like, this is so Rumesa's work, like even in her absence, she's knitting people together. And that feels like such a rugged gift, a gritty gift, but something that no less is a blessing. But you asked, like, what is it? Or let me look in the, okay, if Patrick put it in. You asked in terms of what interfaith work looks like. I do feel like in order to do interfaith work, you have to begin in your particularity. I came to this work by way of studying religion, comparative religion. It just made me come alive. It was fascinating. That experience of what Krister Stendahl calls holy envy, when you're in the midst of and experiencing someone else's tradition and you're just in awe of the beauty, of the profundity of, you're an outsider, and yet you are experiencing a profound moment of deep connection. And I love that saying of holy envy. That was something that really was powerful for me in divinity school, but it like never got beneath the surface. Like I'd be like, this is great. What now? Yay. Now, like we have stuff in common. Yeah, of course we do. But that's not the work. The work is where are the differences? Like if we're going to be bringing people together with divergent identities or different identities, there's going to be divergent perspectives. And so I always felt a little underwhelmed by interfaith dialogue. It was like, what now? You know, where do we go beneath the surface? And I
That's
think,
right.
oh, go ahead.
So, because I think that's right. I think there's either this sort of delicate dancing away from anything that's difficult, or that least drive to the least common denominator, and you lose all of the deep roots that could sustain meaningful dialogue, both about what's shared and the difference of and the particularities. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't think that it's not that there's no value to finding those common points. Actually, like that's a really great starting point, but that's just the beginning.
Mhm.
But I think for me, it was that experience of, oh, I need to go deep into my tradition in order to better understand what's the lens from which I can do this work.
Mhm.
And this theme of hospitality kept coming up for me, right? When you're a perfect stranger, which is somehow how people talk about, visiting other sanctuaries and other houses of worship and communities, um, we're receiving, someone is expressing hospitality, but I have to have a hospitality of heart to receive that gift,
Mhm.
right? Someone can be as gracious and generous as they can be, but if there is no one there to be willing to take a risk, to open their hearts, to be uncomfortable, to be the outsider, to
Mhm.
be worrying in those micro moments, like, what am I screwing up? Like, then that hospitality has nowhere to go.
Mhm.
I think starting to see that there's hospitality is multi-directional and reciprocal. Um, that felt like a big entry point for
Mhm.
me in terms of how do I use the gifts and practical wisdom of my tradition to kind of speak to this work.
I love that. You quoted one of my all-time favorite quotes about hospitality by Letty Russell. I don't know if you can call it off from memory, but I would mess it up if I tried to. But it's just sort of hospitality, embodying God's welcome as we reach across difference. I don't know. I don't know if you can call it off the
I
top of
do
your head.
love Letty Russell, but I cannot do it by heart.
It's in the book. So when you
It
read the
is
book,
in the book.
you'll get to see it. Theme that I really appreciate how much you wove it through the book is just sort of complexity and messiness and
Mm,
discomfort. Like, this is not a neatly packageable. We have to be willing to sit with the discomfort and sit with the not knowing and what that means to have that level of sort of vulnerability and humility and um, willingness to know that none of us are going to get interfaith friendship right all the time, and what it means to sort of go into it with that sense of
yeah.
complexity and vulnerability is really, I think, again, a gift that's just woven throughout the book in terms of the gift on the other side of that
Mm,
waits us if we're willing to wade into those often uncomfortable or messy waters. Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, making mistakes, 100% a part of all this. And actually, I have a book here that I really love called With the Best of Intentions: Interreligious Missteps and Mistakes. This is an amazing book. And one of my colleagues has a chapter in here, Anthony Cruz Pantojas, our humanist chaplain. And, these are seasoned, very adept leaders and shining light on how they have messed up, even like with strangers, with dear friends. And there's something true to the normalizing of the fact that this is messy and we
Mm.
will make mistakes. And
Yep.
it's, of course, how do we repair and how do we receive feedback and how do we keep going? Yeah.
Well, and so just a little sidebar promo. Anthony, who you just mentioned, the humanist chaplain who has a chapter in that book, was part of Auburn's emerging leaders cohort and was a tremendous, gift to the community. And so extra commend that book, and was
Mm-hmm.
grateful to have him part of this work again, which is all about what it means to build community and bridge divides and pursue justice as healing centered leaders. So let me sort of move maybe just slightly onto the next question or the next theme. As I said at the beginning, Auburn's aim in our leadership development programs is to equip leaders with vocational practices and tools to sustain their work long term and intergenerationally. And one of the things that I really loved about your book was this blend of, big ideas and theology and so forth with stories from your lived experience and then descriptions of specific practices that you've engaged students in. Um, and including something that you call provocations, which you might unpack for folks a little bit. But I wonder if you would just talk about what are the practices that help equip you and your colleagues and the students that you work with for spiritual growth and interfaith friendship. What are some of the practices that you find equipping you and those you work with?
Sure. Well, thank you. And thank you for noting the word provocation. Spiritual provocation, that word provocation comes from, I had a wonderful 8th grade English teacher named Mr. Schluntz, who, by the way, was also a very gifted soccer coach. And he would have us write, now I would call it theological reflections. He would give us quotes from Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and say, write for 30 minutes on, I went to the woods to live deliberately, or like whatever it was. And, I see that now as, that's seminary work, like I didn't have that lens obviously then, but that was a deeply formative part of, journaling was always a huge part of my spiritual life. Not that I called it that then, it was just so important to me. And here was this teacher that offered a different lens to do that. So Mr. Schluntz gets all the credit for provocations. You know, of course, in order to do this work, you have to be deeply grounded in your own practice. And a lot of the practices that I share within the text come from Ignatian spirituality, which is the Jesuit spirituality of contemplation, of very much like what Patrick offered in the beginning, of this imaginative prayer. And as I've always been taught, it's like, if God doesn't speak to us through our imaginations, like, how does God speak to us? I guess maybe some people might hear a voice, but it's those kinds of practices that I find to be deeply generative. And, when we try them on with students, not everything is for everybody. And that's okay. But I want people to leave with enough resources in their toolbox that, maybe they don't like imaginative prayer with a gospel story, but maybe they really love walking meditation or walking a labyrinth, or cultivating stillness through motion. But a big part of the work that I do in interfaith circles is developing those skills of active listening. And that means active listening to the people around us, to ourselves, to the world. And a big part of the other side of that too is the spiritual practice of storytelling. And that's at the heart of this work. People don't, sometimes people think they have to be experts in their tradition to do interfaith work, that they're going to be in the hot seat to answer all the questions. And it's like, who could possibly be an expert? Like, I feel like I know a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of my tradition, and it's enough. But like, I love that there's more, like there's always more. And that to me is a deep source of comfort and exhilaration, honestly. But what we're trying to do, and what I'm trying to do really, is to encourage our students and our community members to look at their lives as holy texts, as texts worthy of study, that their stories are holy. They're already living holy lives. Like, sometimes our students feel like, well, after I get this fellowship, or like after I get into this, or after I, make this goal or that goal. And it's like, that's great. It's really, great to push yourself. And also, your worthiness is now. It's in the everyday. And so that practice of telling stories is a huge part of generating the lens in order to see holiness in the everyday, and in order to be a story receiver. So we often do this practice of being a storyteller, story receiver, especially in academic settings where there are different listening skills that are encouraged in the classroom. I'll just put it like that. Where people are thinking about the next thing they're going to say. And that's like rule number one of active listening. Don't think about what you're going to say next. Just be present and receive. And so that's a pretty big disruption. And so it takes time to build those muscles. But I think too about, what do we do to sustain ourselves, especially in moments like this, where the news, we're bombarded. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I had a day where I just felt like totally bombarded. And, with text messages and, trying to organize for, what's going on campus and getting news update. I mean, it's excessive. It's really excessive. And so important to, I was able to kind of label it as a learning experience. It's like, this is what I can't do going forward. But finding those nourishing moments, and that again is the attention to detail, a posture of appreciating and finding those moments of connection. So I'll give you an example. A couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I was walking our dog. It's unseasonably very cold out. Sunday morning, I'm getting ready for mass and teaching, and it just was a lot. And I just paused for a minute, and the sun was just so bright. It was so beaming at like 8 o'clock in the morning. And I had my sunglasses on, and I just turned towards the sun. I'm in my parka, like it was really cold, and turned towards the sun. I could hear the birds and just pause there. And no one else was on the sidewalks in our neighborhood. And it was just this sweet, holy moment. And honestly, it continues to nourish me. Like, I was like not in the headspace to have like a holy moment then. I was, strategizing, like what I have to do. But just being able to pause for that minute, and it's amazing to me that continues with that little moment has continued to nourish me in these weeks to come. And that's like, I guess, the mystic in me, like that we're surrounded by God at all times, but how do we stay awake?
I love that in your book that you quote the Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel,
Yeah.
Sort of about that sense of holy amazement. And I love like what an incredible message for students on campus where there is this sense of it's got to be what's next, to just have that notion of, wait a minute, right now, you are enough. And where is that sense of the holy and the right here and right now? And again, in the midst of a lot of horror and overwhelm and feeling frantic, but what a gift to help cultivate and nurture that spiritual practice in your students. So maybe sort of let's transition to we talked about sort of grounding and equipping to the notion of connecting. As I mentioned, Auburn's third aim is to connect leaders who are committed to healing the world with peers across religious and cultural difference. And again, your book is just so rich with these perspectives and practices and stories related to connection, from intimate spiritual friendship, calling Celtic tradition Ankara, to the spiritual friendships you're generating on campus through your Befriend initiative. And I hope you'll talk about that. And then just to the messy, imperfect, complex work of multi-faith connections. I just wonder if you could speak to what you've learned and share in your book about these kinds of connections.
Oh my gosh, so much. I don't know where to begin.
Right. Also,
I mean, I think,
why don't you start with the befriend thing? So I want to make sure we don't run out of time. That's just the most amazing thing. But then, yeah, unless you have a starting point you'd like to.
I'll start with Befriend and then I'll go on. So Befriend is an interfaith friendship program that I started 5 years ago. It grew out of my doctoral work, which was on loneliness in higher education. And what I found was that it just seemed like there was this vulnerability problem. students weren't sharing joys with their friends, and this continues to be a trend, and they weren't sharing sorrows or challenges with their friends, and so I didn't think I could cure loneliness, but I felt like, well, what if we developed skills? We could help students develop the skills to build meaningful relationships, to get beneath the surface and talk about the things that matter. And so the way this program works is I run it for students, faculty, and staff. And of course, we pair students with students, undergrads, staff, and faculty together. And they commit to spending an hour together each week, and which is on their time. So there's this autonomy piece. It's like, we're not doing this for you. And the point is to prioritize relationships, not just tasks. Like, tasks are important, but like people, pretty important. And so my colleagues and I, we write spiritual practices for these participants, and so it offers kind of a scaffolding, so it kind of alleviates social anxiety, hopefully a little bit. I have heard from some participants who are like, I don't know basics about my friend, but I know what they think about life and death. I love that.
Yeah, go deep.
Yeah, they go deep fast. Ooh,
Mhm.
I love that. And so, yeah, that's the crux of the program, are these spiritual practices. They're just an excuse to get people to spend time together. If they want to do them, they can, but no one's on their case about how they follow it. It's not a formula. I call them invitations. It's an invitation. And Venerable Vanita was on here a little bit ago. He's our Buddhist chaplain. And, it's just such a gift to see how our colleagues write, what they offer. They often are speaking from their, oh, Sebastian, befriend emeritus or alumni. And it's a way for our chaplains to also share from their tradition, build religious literacy, but also make that connection to their personal life. So it's not something, it should be extremely accessible. And so they're one that Anthony has written that's always a hit is their reflection on coffee and making coffee, the ritual of making coffee in the morning, connecting them to their grandma and mother in Puerto Rico. And, so you get the both and of the contextual lived experience and meaning making in the everyday, and connecting it to the tradition. So that is one of the entry points for connection that we offer, and something that's just a joy, honestly, to start afresh each year. So one thing I will say to your question, Shannon, of kind of the bigger takeaways, I think what I've learned is you can only move at the speed of trust. And trust takes time. And sometimes there will be outside forces who think you should be doing this and this and this, and you gotta, have this hot button dialogue and that thing. And it's just, like, I have found of trusting that instinct of like, no, right now what we really need to do is build empathy. And that often means going in a back door. So not, pounding people over the head with these big questions, and but to say, tell us a story about the last time you experienced wonder or joy, or tell us a story about a time you felt truly welcome. And then they can kind of do also that reverse engineering of, well, what are we doing to express welcome? But that feels really important to me. And especially last academic year, there was this assumption, I think, that, well, if there aren't like hot, interfaith dialogues happening in these contexts, where are they happening? And it's like, where, like, you have to listen to where people are and go where that energy is in a pastoral way. And that's not where our students were, they had these deep reserves of connection and love for one another, even though they disagreed. Many of them disagreed pretty deeply on some profound issues, but they knew each other's hearts. Um, and I just had to keep kind of leaning into that. And in the spirit of, I think one of the other pieces, the moving at the speed of trust, and not overlooking small moments and seemingly small connections. Like, and maybe that's the feminist theologian in me too, of believing in the transformative power of the small. So let me give you a story. Last fall, in the immediacy last fall we began our Interfaith Student Council, which I now co-lead with our Muslim chaplain, which is wonderful. So in this group, it's students from different religious and philosophical communities. They have representatives who are part of the Interfaith Student Council. And then we have at-large members for students who, like right now we have a Baha'i student. We've had 6 students, like students whose communities aren't as large, but they still want to be part of the community. And we, because of scheduling, we didn't have a Muslim rep. We didn't have a rep from the Muslim Student Association. And that happens, right? Like students' schedules are changing. But once October 7th happened, of course, and everything that, the fallout ongoing, the MSA had other fish to fry. There was so much going on that it wasn't something that they could prioritize, which I totally understood. So when we were doing our, we call it sacred calendaring, which is quite literally bringing our calendars to the table and talking about how our traditions experience time. It's often a chaotic experience. It's very beautiful, of people kind of throwing out ideas and what's happening in their communities. And it was like make me cry telling the story. But one of the Jewish students who was a part of the council last year, just quietly on the side, was going online and looking up the MSA and all of their events. And she put everything on that calendar silently. And it was just this, like a seemingly small moment that showed she knew who wasn't in the room. She knew it was a problem, and she did what she could. And like that is a testament to that witness that sometimes is prophetic and seems like this big, but it's actually a testament to a culture, a testament to connection. And so like that is something I take with me, those moments of surprise too. It took me a second to realize what she was doing, and I could not have been more grateful and more proud of this young woman.
I want to sit for a moment with that. That's a big, small moment. Again, just speaks to that community of trust that you've built and what it means for folks to, excuse me, I've lost track of time. I don't know if we need to make sure that we're on track. So, yeah, that story's really undone me. Which really sort of, I mean, I feel like that one story holds so much in terms of both the power of story to communicate, or to, bring folks together. I'm going to turn to Patrick now to join our conversation, who will hopefully be a little bit less undone than me from that beautiful story. And my heart's very full right now. That really just Patrick.
Lynn, I mean, I want to thank you. I mean, for all the stories, the gift of friendship, and the way that you um, sounds it like not a program, but a program. You know, like making the excuse to gather people and reconnect in a time where isolation and loneliness seem to be on a rise. I mean, this was part of one of the things we shared with staff and partners was. The last two, the parting prescription and the prescription right before on loneliness from the outgoing Surgeon General. And so it feels like you're addressing a real need in this moment. And I know that reading through your book was endorsing your book. I mean, it was such a gift and a reminder. I feel like reading the text is the invitation you're doing on campus for us to go out and reconnect with people that we know and do not yet know as we should. So just what a gift your writing is. You know, this series, before I get to the question, the big question we ask all the guests on this for this series, I want to remind folks, please send me your questions. We'll have a little time for Q&A in a second here. So send me the questions or put them in the chat because we're going to curate those questions that you might have for Lynn. Our question is, this is called the Heal the World series. And, you know, when we had Tommy Orange on the first time, we were talking about the deep histories and how to write healing narratives and healing stories, how stories heal. And the question we asked him that we were carrying through this series is how much of healing happens as an individual, like in your own sort of self. I see that working through the text, the way you talk about the people you love and your own kind of healing journey, and how much happens in community. I feel like a book that has a subtitle on friendships, it leans a lot on the community thing. So I'm going to ask you to be really creative with this answer because if not, I'm going to start pretending I'm Randy Newman and saying, you got a friend. So yeah, if you could save me and think creatively about this question of healing. How does embracing our time and specifically the interfaith friendships that you've been cultivating and you behold in your own person make space for healing?
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, of course, it's a both and, you know, like the healing inside, the healing we need to do internally, the healing we need to do out in the world. One thing I didn't mention, but I think is kind of embedded within the mistakes and missteps is self-compassion. And that's something that comes up a lot in my work with students of how do we cultivate it's part of resilience, so that we're not getting ourselves down, you know, when we make mistakes, but learning from them and bouncing back and not perseverating, which is something I'm still working on. So, but you know, I feel, what do we need to heal from? I think the lie, like the lie that we're not inextricably linked, like the lie that my life is not completely embedded in your life circumstance. I mean, that is an insidious lie that we are seeing play out in real time in this country right now, and how that lie has shaped now policy and all of that. But I think that internal healing needs to start here. And for me, I write about this in the book, but I feel like I had to and I continue to heal from internalized clericalism. It made me feel like, oh, I don't know, like maybe this is not, like, I don't know, if I don't have the bona fides to do this. And it's like, no, that's a lie. Like that is diminishing. Like I was diminishing myself. That's the way these kinds of oppressive structure, systemic structures function, right? We diminish ourselves and others. But in order to do this work out in the world, we have to get to that place of healing. And to, one of the spiritual practices early in the book is the gift of being seen, truly seen by someone else. But also we need to truly see ourselves, like our ugly parts, our broken parts, and to shine light on that. Nadia Bolz-Weber has this great line where she's like, God doesn't use you for all the stuff you're good at. Like God uses all of you. And I think about that too with this question of like, even our messy, mucky, like stressful parts of ourselves that we might want to hide are sources of strength, our sources of our opportunities. But I think the big healing has to start with the internal. And of course, part of that is letting go of assumptions and letting go of, and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's like step one, Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could go on, but I'm grateful for the question. Of course, I think, friendship and those connections are transformative. And I mean, empathy transforms everything, It's like someone who hasn't thought about until it hits home, and then a change of heart. But how do we kind of connect folks before, so it doesn't take that it doesn't take so long, right, for us to see that we're family and that we need each other. And in the saying of a friend of mine, she says that we belong to one another.
Let me push you a little bit on that, picking up on the one of the questions we have in the chat from Patty Daly around what in this interfaith work is most potent for healing. And I want to push the extent of friendships. This is a really hard time to be friends with everybody. I don't think in your text you meant friend with every. I don't think right now what's going on at Tufts, it's a hard time. It's a hard time in Boston, hard time up where you are in Medford. It's a hard time in this country, politically, socially. And to kind of say, like, if there was a national befriend program, I do think the world would be a lot better. I feel like, our kids get it pretty quickly. But the imagination that you have for how far to push this in a moment where it feels like something as loving, healing, as giving as friendship may be, there are forces that you are up against that are defining the lines, sometimes very explicitly with redlining, like who you will be friends with and who you will not be friends with.
Yeah.
Where those dividing lines are. And it's not just a few people, it's both a safety concern, for me and my kids around how they manage and walk in the world and keep themselves safe. It's a challenge of long cultural histories that have separated us. How far, at least on your campus, or you're seeing in this moment, do we need to push this friendship? Who are we called to be friends with?
Oh man, thanks, Pat. I just this is the question, right? I mean, there's nothing. I hope I haven't sounded like friendship is all fuzzy. I mean, it's gritty, and I believe in boundaries. I believe that no one should be forced to be in relationship with someone who does not consider them a full human being. Not everyone is Valerie Kaur. Her prophetic witness to radical love, revolutionary love, is aspirational, so inspiring, but we're not all there. And there's certain folks who are not engaging in dialogue from a place of goodwill. I'm not recommending everyone go engage with that person. I have a section in my book about knowing one's limits and honoring those boundaries. And maybe that would change, and maybe it won't change. And I think that that's okay. My church is about as polarized as this country, and it's heartbreaking. And what I can say is that I don't want to be part of that, just digging in. I've started a couple years ago, I started attending a church down the street. And the first time I was there, maybe 6 years ago, I left just livid. You know, it was a Holy Trinity Sunday about this diversity of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And, there was 5 white male priests on the altar. I'm like, guys, like, this hurts. Like, it hurts internally to see, to have the gifts of the Spirit not fully acknowledged and represented. And now, I started going back to that church, and I'm just telling from my own experience. I'm in awe of the elders there who've been going to church there for decades. Going to this parish has softened my edges. It's given me it's taken me to a place of warmth and wonder and seeing the beauty in their observance, even though mine is really different. And this is just one example, but it's a thing that I'm just kind of still understanding what's happening internally. But, slowly befriending this other expression of Catholicism, which I probably don't see eye to eye with many of these folks on a lot of things. But that softening of the edges, and maybe I think it's important what happens in our inner landscape, but it has made life more pleasant for me, quite literally. But I feel like it's also cultivating a spirit of generosity where I just before was just livid, and I don't know what scaling up looks like, Mara. I see you in the chat. But I know that empathy is where it begins. And we're in a really gnarly moment. And it feels transgressive and courageous to share stories at a time when we don't know what's going to be held against us. And as one of my dear friends, Chris, told me, Coop, she calls me Coop, don't intellectualize this. It's just going to make it worse. You got to lean into the faith. And I needed to hear that day, and mystery is a big part of our tradition, leaning into the mystery. But I'm with you. In the conversation we had at Tufts a couple weeks ago, we had a student in the room who just said, screw this, I don't want to love my enemy. It's like, yeah, that's a valid response. Yeah.
I love it. And the way you talk about it in your book, and this is also tied to a question in my text messages. The staff have heard me tell the story before, but our family, the interfaith family, that we kids were having a hard time at school, and we invited them to Shabbat dinner to come in, come on Friday night. And my daughter Carmelita goes, but she's my enemy. Like, just the deep fear of what do you mean I have to invite her over for dinner? That's not a thing. And just thinking about how we like even at her young age, trying to navigate this fear of people, that something as simple as inviting someone over to the house to share stories could be so terrifying. And I am curious about in your work, working with young adults, because that's who, Auburn in our Emerging Leaders Program want to serve. And what advice do you have when you're working with that young population, folks who are trying to make friends in a time, again, that's polarized and all that, that this helping them overcome that fear to make that first phone call, to make that invitation, to make a new friend. It was easy when we were, if we going back to the meditation, it was easy when we were younger on the playground and just kind of walking up to someone who's doing something that you may or may not want to do, or do the parallel play thing, as kids often do. But as adults, it seems even harder to make new friends. Yeah, what advice, how do you get people out of that fear zone and into a place where they can start making connection?
Thank you. Well, I think was in terms of working with young adults, the other big piece is developmental stages of where people are, where their brain development is. There's not a lot of space for nuance in the 18 to 23 range. And so that's something that we just have to acknowledge. I mean, I've now been working with this age of students for almost 20 years, and it's something that it's always in my mind of like what's possible too in our brains at different parts of our life. But to your question of how to build that, I mean, that's a conversation I have with students all the time who sadly are seniors, and they're like, I feel like I have no friends, like I know all these people. And I ask the really obnoxious question, which is like, well, what are you doing to make a friend? You have to try. Like, you have to try. You have to put yourself out there. And oftentimes when we ask, it's like with our friends down the street who, always offer, like, if you ever need us to like take Rory to school, just say the word, which was so nice, but we had to ask, and to say, actually, we do need help. Can you help on this day and this day? Oh, absolutely. And sometimes it's the own vulnerable ask for help that actually, and people want to help usually, but it invites someone else to be reciprocal. And then that's vulnerability, right? And you don't get intimacy and connection without vulnerability. You just don't. So part of it is being proactive. I often invite people to be of service, like go volunteer at a place that you care about, or, that's a great way to make connections. People who share values. Also, not underselling a connection you already have because it's not your BFF. That there are people in our lives who are actually really important points of contact, but we don't often appreciate, like the older gentleman I see on the parkway when I walk our dog. That's actually a point of contact and connection. But if I'm just like, whatever, it's just an old guy on the parkway, like, then I'm dismissing it. But if I say, like, wow, I just love the way that guy talks about the weather. Like, it's like, it's very evocative. But yeah, I think anywhere from that proactiveness, and also just naming it. I think that's one thing with the pandemic hopefully helped us acknowledge that loneliness it's not a personal moral failing. It's a systemic issue. And as we know, a public health issue.
Shan, did you have any other questions before I wrap up with a final practice and invitation for more Auburn?
Not a question, just incredible gratitude to you, Lynn, for this conversation, for your ongoing kind of work and witness and creation of this sort of safe spiritual place and nurture that you're doing on campus. Just really grateful for the conversation in the book. Then I'm excited for folks who have joined us for this conversation to get their chance to read it before too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. It's really a blessing to get to know you these last few weeks.
Thank you, Shannon. Lynn. I'm going to spotlight Erica real quick. Thank you, Erica, for the welcome and introduction. Lynn, can you remind everyone, title of the book, where to get it, where everyone who's on this call will receive a book, but it's good if you're sharing the news with other people. I just heard this great talk, and I recommend this book. Where would they go to get it?
The name of the book is, I don't know if it's reversed here, but Embracing Our Time, the Sacrament of Interfaith Friendship. And you can order it through your local independent bookstore, which I would highly recommend. And our store has been doing orders and is already shipping them out. And actually, this is the bookshop that's distributing all of the books here tonight. But I'll put their name in the chat. It's called Books on the Square. And they seem to have the hookup. I don't know. They have the early hookup. I think it has something to do with Patrick Reyes. I'm going to leave that there. But yeah, and it's something you can order through, Fortress Press directly, which is the publisher, or I would just go to your local indie bookstore and ask them to order it. And yeah.
Lynn, thank you. I mean, just this conversation, the invitation to see the world differently, to make friends, make connection, to address these. And I'm going to go, was it Mara who put in the chat to scale it up? I'm just going to say, I'm going to interpret whatever that meant as make this a program, a center, put it up online. People need friends. You would be famous, too famous for the dean's lectures at Auburn Theological Seminary, because I feel like a lot of this is a need. You're addressing a direct need to connect in these moments where I feel like people are disconnected more than ever. So just thank you for everything that you do, for what you wrote down. Here's the last invitation, last part of the practice at the beginning
Can I say one more thing?
Oh yeah,
Pat,
go ahead, Lynn.
I forgot to say earlier. I feel like sometimes interfaith work, we do it because intra-faith work is way harder.
Yes.
So, but I feel like we get the skills in this work to bring it back to the real tensions within our communities, within our traditions. And that is a learning. I'm still figuring it out, but I just wanted to name it because, thank you, Lisa. Because I feel like there's a way we can go back and forth to bring these learnings into different hot zones in life. But something I'm continuing to think about, and my thinking has evolved since writing, but just wanted to mention it. Yeah.
Oh, you are so spot on. And that's going to go in that fear category for me. I'll just keep thinking about that one.
I get that.
So
before you do the practice, just one other thank you to Elsie Barnhart, Auburn Theological Seminary's awesome program manager, who's doing all the behind the scenes tech stuff for this gathering. So just gratitude, shout out to her.
Yeah, thank you, Elsie. Okay, quick practice. Everyone get your phones out. If you don't have them, like this is a modern day technology. If you put them on silent because you're a good participant, get your phone out. It's a very simple one. Text someone. Thank you for being my friend.
Oh.
You don't have to tell them you're coming on this, but just see what you got back. And if you're joyful, if you're here because you're a friend of Lynn's, say, Coop, thank you. Send it to her. But thank you, Lynn, for this. We got some opportunities coming up for Auburn. I just want to remind people we have another Dean's Lecture. I'm going to invite Lisa Anderson, our Director of Leadership, to talk about the next Dean's Lecture. Lisa, welcome.
Hi.
Welcome to the program.
Hi, I'm very excited. First of all, thank you, Lynn. Lots of great nuggets that I got from your presentation. And so I look forward to getting my copy of the book. And next month, May 1st, Dearly Beloved, Prince, Spirituality, and This Thing Called Life by Pamela Ayo Yetunde. And so we're going to be picking up on those themes of healing and healing-centered leadership and love and justice, and miraculously and wonderfully through the lens of what Ayo and those who have read the book know is the prophetic witness of Prince.
Oh. And that book is also coming out. Everyone will get a copy of that. And I think there might be a soundtrack that goes along with this talk. I'm just guessing.
Yes. May I just say,
Yeah.
if those who are on the phone have a chance or on the video, if you can watch Sign of the Times, the Prince film, I think from 1987, in concert film, the book's whole premise is kind of built around that particular film, and then all of his other works kind of interspersed between it. So,
Oh, I love it. Thank you, Lisa.
mhm.
So make sure to sign up for that. If you're not on make sure you sign up for the newsletter so you can get all this. Next week on April 14th on Monday, check out our website, auburnseminary.org, and our YouTube channel. We got a big announcement. We would love your support. So if you have a chance to give following this conversation and or after April 14th, it's a big announcement I'm really excited about. But welcome you all to pay attention to what we got going on at Auburn Theological Seminary this month. Lynn, again, thank you. Thank you for writing the book, for taking the time to do this. I know writing up things is when you're prioritizing relationships, and writing is one of the first things to go. So thank you for taking the time to write this as a gift. And thank you for everyone who showed up for this Heal the World series. We're so grateful that you continue to show up to hear how stories are shaping and healing our communities. And gratitude to the Auburn team, to Shannon, Erica, Lisa, Elsie, and Emma, who's on the call, for all the amazing work to make this possible. Just thank you all.
Thank you, Patrick, and to the whole Auburn Theological Seminary team. It's just a joy to get to hang out with you and learn from you. And I know our connections will continue to grow, but it's an honor to be part of this series. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Lynn. And that ends the formal program. We're going to hit stop on the record, and then anyone who wants to linger and have a little time for friendship, I'll hang on to the call so that way